I'm Lee Camp, the most censored comedian in America, and I've lost everything so that I can bring you this show. From an office that isn't even my own. I can't even have my own books. These are not my own books behind me. The FCC came and took all my books behind me, so I wouldn't have books, and now I got to sit in front of other people's books. But I just want to tell you, these actually are not my books behind me. In case I don't even know it's there. So if you see a book behind me and you go, "Oh, I had no idea Lee was into Harry Potter or into reading about how to be the best black woman he can be," not my books, but just to let you know up top, I got a lot of important and great stories for you. There's either the stuff the mainstream media won't tell you or the stuff that they're telling you, but they're not really getting to the core of it, to the center, to that deep, dark place that is the reality of the story. So please, hit subscribe, hit thumbs up, and let's just go. Let's just go. So there's been 100-car pileup in Illinois. And that part you can get from the mainstream media. But in a minute here, I'm going to tell you the part you can't get from your mainstream media. So 100-car pileup. I'm going to show you video here as I talk about it. 6 people dead as of now, but just an unbelievable devastation. 100 cars. And of course, a lot of those are semi-trucks. So this isn't just cars. It is trucks. It is these massive tankers or whatever they're called, Mack trucks, just obliterated. Now, it's due to a sandstorm or a dust storm that I guess it's not sand because it's not where they're not next to the Sahara, but a dust storm that rolled through. And part of it is that Americans, when something like a dust storm comes up and we literally can't see even like inches in front of our face, we just keep driving. We're like, I don't give a shit. I'm going anyway. No, I don't know if that's actually true, but that people were trying to drive through it. But clearly it caused zero visibility, causing all of these things to crash into each other and killing 6 people. Here's the aspect of it that you will not get on your mainstream media. This is caused by a combination of climate change, which is playing a big role in the drying up, the desertification of various parts of our country. It's not just climate change, but it's the flood drought cycle where you have immense amounts of water that often will break up or wash away areas of ground. And then and because it follows drought, that water is not as easily absorbed into the ground. So often it'll run off in the form of floods. But on top of that, another aspect of this that your mainstream media won't tell you is that this is caused by over farming of these areas, just destroying the topsoil. And here's the thing. If we were just farming the amount we needed to farm, I'd be like, well, that sucks. But what do you want us to do? This is the only way our system can be set up. We just have to farm this much. But of course, that's not actually true, literally true at all. You have the fact that we throw out 40% of all food in 40% of all food across America. Much of that is thrown out by individuals, but the majority of it is thrown out by grocery stores and things because they have to have heaping piles of everything that you walk in and see. You can't, no one wants to pick an orange when there's 5 oranges on a shelf. Everyone wants to pick an orange out of a mountain of oranges. I don't understand what that marketing is, but so they don't just have what they need. They've got to have mammoth amounts of it. One of the chapters actually in my new ebook, which you can see that in the corner of the screen, Dangerous Ideas, which you can get at leecamp.net. But one of the chapters is about the waste of milk in this country where farms produce insane amounts of milk and then don't use it all. So they then dump a large amount of it into lagoons, into landfills. They just get rid of it. Why do they keep producing more than is needed? Because they get subsidies, because we live in an inverted totalitarian system, a corporatocracy in which corporations own the government. So corporations, big ag, etc., tell the government, hey, we'd like billions of dollars in subsidies. And so they give them billions of dollars in subsidies. And these farms don't want to lose those subsidies. So they just dump out all of the milk that they're not using, which is a terrible way to set up an economic system. And a lot of this overfarming is caused by our insatiable, insane amounts of meat. I mean, that we eat. It's just, look, I don't eat meat, but I don't begrudge you eating meat. If you eat meat, then do it. Be you. Live your truth, as every stupid liberal will say. I live my truth, which is funny because it's like, well, isn't Donald Trump living his truth? So. Like, if everybody has their own truth, doesn't that eliminate the word truth? It's my truth. Well, maybe it's not true, though. What if you're living your truth and you're fucking wrong? Couldn't that be a thing, too? Side note. But so I don't begrudge you if you're a meat eater, but can we decrease this insane amount of meat that we eat? And something that is almost never talked about, even by people that talk about the insane amounts of meat that we eat, is the fact that all of those animals, I don't know if you know this, they have to eat something while they're alive before they get the ceremonial, actually unceremonious bolt gun to the head. They have to eat something. So we have to grow nutty amounts of corn and soy. And I know that alfalfa is like uses tons of water and is grown in the Arizona, California region where they're dealing with drought. Well, they got drought, but drought usually. And they then ship that alfalfa to China, which then feeds it to their cows. So we're using up all our water to ship to China to feed cows in China, which is called virtual water theft. I covered it on a recent episode of Most Censored News. But anyway, the amount of meat that we eat is unbelievable. We have meat in like ice cream. We have meat in candy. We have meat in. It's like, why do you need leather underwear? You know, just can't you have the fake leather underwear? The amount of meat we eat is unbelievable, and people act like they can't survive without that amount of meat. Like you can't go a meal without bacon strips wrapped around your peanut butter and jelly. No, you fucking don't need that much meat. But we eat that way. We overfarm. We destroy these regions in the country. We've, of course, cut down all the trees, right, to do all this farming. So when you take away all the trees and when you take away the nutrients in the upper layers of the soil and you have this monoculture over farming, you end up with dust storms. And obviously they're getting worse. This is 100-car pileup that has just taken place in Illinois. 100 cars. And you won't get anything that I just said from your mainstream media. From your mainstream media, you get this little surface area coverage, just a light skimming off the top of reality. Illinois dust storm pileup on I-55 involved 72 vehicles, although I think that number grew to closer to 100. Leaves 7 dead, over 30 hurt. And that's essentially the depth of it, which is not the full story, right? We can't talk about, here we got some religion into it, though. At the bottom of it, one of the people quotes is saying, it's a miracle my wife made it out. I definitely feel God was watching over her. So we did manage in this story to get some God involved. We did. I always like to put a dollop of God in a story about how we're over farming, eating way too much meat, destroying our environment and causing dust storms that cause 100-car pileups. But yeah, God was watching over things. God is doing a shit job, honestly. If he or she is allowing 100-car pileups. Why God? And why would you? And of the 6 or 7 people that died, would God just didn't give a shit about them? I don't. Why do you have to get God involved? Just leave God out of this. He, she, or they does not want anything to do with this 100-car pileup that is clearly not their fault. All right, I got a lot of stories for you though. That's a quick one there that we got. Not my books behind me. Don't even know what's there, so don't blame me if there's the grand history of the KKK behind behind me. Then perhaps I should have noticed that and taken that one out. But anyway. And for those of you listening to the podcast, which anyone, if you can't get the video, grab the podcast. It's called The Lee Camp Show or Moment of Clarity because Moment of Clarity was banned by Spotify, so it's been renamed on Spotify. But because I've lost essentially everything, thanks to being anti-war and anti-capitalist and anti-destruction of our world. And I don't know why it is. I want sustainability. I want people to be able to live. I want people to be able to live into the future longer than the next 3 years. And I don't know why that is. I know it's fringe. I know it's nutty, but I've just been kind of going that path, thinking we should probably have a world in like 10 years. But I got a lot of big stories for you coming up. So let's get to those. Someone's saying I need to work on selling out. Yeah, I totally do. I need to do a better job of selling out. I've totally failed on that front. I could have gotten a sponsorship from every book behind me that I don't even know what it is. If I had just reached out to publishers and said, I'm going to have books behind me. But I want to speak about someone else who I've been so well. Actually, I'll tell you some of the topics I'm hitting. I'm hitting on some more quotes by RFK Jr. that are third rail quotes that'll absolutely get him banned by the DNC. Not an allowable candidate. I'm going to show some of the hypocrisy in our homelessness. We're going to get into some of the war on LGBTQ. We're going to get into the assassination attempt on Putin that just happened. I'm going to talk about that and so much more. So hang in there. Let's keep going. And please share this. Please let folks know that you're into my stuff, that you're into my junk. Wow, that sounds dirty. All right, don't just back up off my junk, okay? But all right, so RFK Jr., which I've been highlighting some quotes and clips from him. He's running for president. Most of you know he's running for president against Joe Biden in the primary, Democratic primary. And I've been playing some clips, showing some things from him. And as I've said before, it doesn't mean I agree with every word he says, but of the stuff he says, first of all, I really like that a lot of it is third rail. A lot of it is outside the realm of allowable thought for Democrats, but really for candidates in general, at least the ones that are allowed to get very far into our so-called democratic process that is anything but democratic. This is, how can you call voting on black box machine where you can never know what the hell happened? You can't even you just blind, you just stab it, close your eyes and push your finger against a thing and say you voted. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm against anyone who's calling out these things in a certain way that is against the allowable thought process on these channels, on your mainstream media, in the Democratic primary, in the Republican debates. These two parties that are corporate shill parties that are completely accountable to corporate America and do nothing else. But anyway, so that's one reason. But the other reason is that of the things RFK Jr. says, I agree with about, I think, 80%. I haven't seen it all, but I'd say 80%, which is roughly 79% more than any other Democratic candidate. So why not? Why not highlight some of this? And again, I don't think we should talk about presidential elections for fucking 2 years. So I'm not highlighting this because of the campaigning. I'm highlighting it because I think that the Democrats will not be able to handle that he's saying these things, and they will find a way to sideline him. And as I've said before, they actually have inserted something into their bylaws that says they can delete anyone they want from the Democratic primaries simply because they believe he or she is not Democratic enough. If they decide that, if the head of the DNC decides that, you're out. So I think they very well may decide that with RFK Jr. But anyway, for now, he's running. But this is something else he said that is third rail, that is not allowable by your Democrats, by your mainstream media cabal in general. He tweeted out, instead of championing free speech, the U.S. actively persecutes journalists and whistleblowers. I'll pardon brave truth tellers like Julian Assange and investigate the corruption and crimes they exposed. This isn't the Soviet Union. I don't know why you had to throw in a hit against the Soviet Union. Come on, man. But the America I love doesn't imprison dissidents. Free Assange. He then said other brave truth tellers include John Kiriakou, Chelsea Manning, reality winner, Daniel Hale, Thomas Drake, Jeffrey Sterling, and Edward Snowden. They were trying to return America to its democratic and humanitarian ideals. And pretty much all of that is never said by your mainstream media. It is ignored. These people that it's just said in that list are attacked mercilessly. I mean, John Kiriakou has been attacked and he's not even in prison anymore. He ended up with like 2 years because he took the plea deal where he had to say that he has harmed America and he understood that he was harming America by revealing that we have a torture program, despite that it's against the Geneva Conventions, which we think doesn't apply to us. That whole here's how countries should behave in order to be rational, adult, ethical, moral nations. That whole agreement that we all signed on to, well, that's not for the United States. That's just for the other countries. You go and enjoy your Geneva Convention that you've signed on to. You go enjoy that, and we're gonna sit over here and do whatever the fuck we want, strapping car batteries to dudes' balls just to see if we can get them to tell us some terrorist enterprise that doesn't actually exist, but we're insisting it does. And it's funny what you'll confess to when you have something strapped to your balls. Anyway, so Kiriakou, he spent 2 years in prison because he had to confess and claim he plead guilty, but he's out. And I've done many interviews and many conversations with him, but they haven't stopped going after him. He's had his life destroyed. They every time they can, the chance they can get to attack him and to cut his sources of income, they have. So it doesn't stop with prison. That's how our empire works. Once you have revealed the truth of your empire, of the empire, the U.S. empire, then they will continue to go after you. And that includes all these other people on this list. I mean, Chelsea Manning was released and then they re-imprisoned her for another year. Daniel Hale, Thomas Drake, Jeffrey Sterling, Edward Snowden, they continue to go after all of them. But of course, top on that list is Julian Assange, who has been tortured for over 10 years. And you won't hear this from very many Democratic candidates. I think Marianne Williamson has said some things about how Assange needs to be freed. So thank goodness there's another. But in general, this is not allowable in the Democrat debate. It's not allowable for most Republicans either. Obviously, Pompeo, being a Republican, and Trump, they were plotting to assassinate Assange. So that's the kind of clowns that we have running this country, sociopathic clowns. And, I will give RFK Jr. the credit for being brave enough to speak up about these things and to say the truth about things like Julian Assange. So, but we'll see continued attacks, as it gets closer to, by the way, they've already said that it's quite possible that Biden won't debate any of these people running against him, primarying him as Democrats. So the DNC will work to make sure there's no debates, because let's be honest, Joe Biden would look like a 1980s robot who just had a pitcher of water dumped over its head. Sparks would be flying out. His head would be spinning around. He wouldn't be giving cogent answers to anything during a debate. Nothing, nothing fucking, they wouldn't have a complete sentence. And I realized I shouldn't have stuttered so much on a sentence where I'm saying he can't have a complete sentence, but it was still a complete sentence when you cut out all the stuttering. Uh, you can't, he can't debate these people, and they know that because of how horrific it would look. He's had fewer and fewer press moments where he sits in front of the press because they know that you can see that there's not much left there. And so they've already said that it's unlikely that he'll be debating any of these people that are primarying him. The effort will be, mark my words, this will be the effort. One will be to, in these early stages, years before the goddamn election, they'll float some stuff to try and destroy these people, a quote here or there to try and, so far, I think the ones they've announced is just RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson, but they'll float some things to try and destroy them. But outside of that, they'll just give them zero media coverage. And I know that RFK Jr. has done some CNN interviews and stuff. So right now they are giving him a little, but I imagine ultimately it will just be zero media coverage. So most of the nation will not even know that there's anyone running against Joe Biden in the primary. And that'll be the end of it. Now, if they manage, if RFK Jr. manages to not be as shadow banned as I am and actually manages to get his message out there and get enough people talking about him, then they'll step it up to the next phase and the next phase. And who knows, maybe eventually they could get to the final phase of stopping someone running for president or being president, as, I don't know, RFK's father might know when he was running for president, or RFK Jr.'s uncle might know when he was president. That is the final stage. I don't think that generally nowadays, there was a time back in our history where they were, the CIA, the FBI, and the others were assassinating many of our top leaders in our country. MLK, Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, RFK Jr., JFK. But nowadays, they do it far less with assassination. They will do that with little people who are revealing the truth, but they do the bigger figures far less with assassination and more with lawfare. Lawfare is the most common practice now. They sideline these people with lawsuits and try and lock them up or try and make it impossible for them to run. But all right, let's get on to another story here. This is, I just thought this is amazing. Now it fits with the segue here is that I was just talking about our mainstream media being garbage and how they obviously are not standing up for Julian Assange. They are not going to have RFK Jr. on their airwaves much standing up for Julian Assange. They don't cover Julian Assange almost at all anymore, even as they continue to torture him. Meanwhile, the United States has the temerity, the gonads to claim that the U.S. empire gives a shit about journalists imprisoned in Russia, right? There's currently, I think, an American journalist imprisoned in Russia, and the U.S. is like, how dare you release it? And yeah, okay, that's true. All journalists should be released, but you can't say that shit as long as you have Julian Assange in prison. You can't, no one is listening to you pretending that you are serious when you've had Julian Assange in prison for 10 goddamn years. You can't walk out and go, we care about freedom of press. We want these. No, you don't. No, you don't. Even slightly. So it undermines everything that the U.S. says anytime they try and stand up for a journalist. Now, the only times they stand up for journalists are when it harms a country that they're at odds with for one reason or another. Then they'll stand up for journalists, and that is the only time that they will stand up for journalists. They only stood up for Jamal Khashoggi, who Saudi Arabia chopped up and threw into a fire pit. They only stood up for him for about 10 minutes because Saudi Arabia is an ally of ours, but also, sorry for so many ball references, but has us by the balls because they are the core, the bottom of the pyramid of how the petrodollar works. So if they were to turn against us, that would be the end of that. Anyway, that's the segue. How much our media sucks. And I loved this chart because it says a lot about our media. It says so much about our media. So now I don't know how well you can see it, but because the writing is rather small, and for those of you on the podcast, I'll explain it. Anyway, it's a bar graph, but on the left side shows the actual causes of deaths of Americans. Now, the latest, I guess they had numbers, was 2016. So this is 2016, but this is the causes of death of Americans, with the largest colored areas being the top cause of death. And that's the amount. So heart disease and cancer are pretty close. Heart disease, 30%, cancer, 29.5%. And so they have the largest colored blocks there. Now, on the right side is a bar that shows the mainstream media, specifically the New York Times, in the same year and how much they covered these things. Now, you'd think some of the largest causes of deaths of Americans should be heavily covered by our media. But the only one that even gets close to being covered the amount that it's actually causing death is cancer, which is still less. Cancer gets 13.5% of New York Times coverage. Now, this is not coverage in general. This is coverage of various causes of death. So 100% would be all the coverage of causes of death by the New York Times. But cancer is the only one that's even close to being relative in the world of like almost rational reality. Heart disease gets almost nothing, 2.5% of New York Times coverage. Actually, stroke is almost on par. Strokes causes 5% of deaths and has 5% of New York Times coverage. But homicide, so various types of murder, gets 22.8% of New York Times coverage. And homicide actually as a cause of death is so tiny, they couldn't even write the word on the bar graph. Homicide causes 0.9% of American death, a tiny, negligible amount. Now, another one that is way out of proportion is terrorism was covered by the New York Times, like as in domestic terrorism, so as in the cause of death for Americans, was covered 35.6% of all of their cause of death coverage by the New York Times. 35%. Over 35%. Terrorism actually causing death in America is so tiny they couldn't even fit the color on the bar graph. They just had to put a little asterisk underneath the bar graph that says terrorism less than 0.01% of deaths of Americans. So the New York Times covers terrorism a whopping over a third of all cause of death coverage by the New York Times. And this is really pretty common with mainstream media. So it's the same for other mainstream media outlets. But a third of all New York Times cause of death coverage is terrorism, even though terrorism is so tiny, it's basically non-existent. I mean, when was the last time you met someone who was terrorized? When was the last time you met someone who was even in the area of terrorism? Now, terrorism is, I think they're separating terrorism from, from mass shootings. I'm assuming they're putting mass shootings into the area of homicide, because terrorism has a specific definition of like trying to create a very specific political point. Now, I suppose you could put some mass shootings into that category, but mass shootings, the number of Americans they kill, I mean, so it's weird. Mass shootings are insane. The number of in America is truly out of control. It's like over one a day. So it's madness. But the number of Americans killed by a mass shooting is still a relative nothing on the list of what kills Americans. So Anyway, so it's not that I think people should not talk about mass shootings. Mass shootings are a major problem in this country. However, uh, in terms of actual number dead, it is tiny compared to heart disease, cancer, road accidents. Someone dies on the road about every 30 seconds. In fact, I just covered a 100-car pileup a second ago. I mean, I've often said that if they covered someone dying in a car crash in America the same way they cover death by terrorism or death by a mass shooting, like if every time someone died in a car accident in America, it was national news, no one would drive again. We would all just sit home. Maybe we'd occasionally take a pogo stick to the store. Like, very rarely you'd be like, I'm going to risk it. I'm going to put on my roller skates and head on out, because we would all be so horrified. And it's similar to like burglary, burglaries where someone comes in like a ski mask and they break your windows and they take your stereo and threaten you with a gun. If we see those on all the ads, right, for the home security systems, we see this kind of ads constantly. If we saw that amount of coverage of death by car crash, then again, no one would ever let a loved one drive a car again. But because we're fine with people dying by car crash, I mean, honestly, how many of you, feel free to throw it in the comments thread if you want, how many of you have family members who died in a car crash? Like, I have at least one or two. And then in terms of friends, I have probably 5 more, or 4 or 5 more. And so it's like, we all have people in our lives who die in car crashes, and yet it's really not a discussion. It's really not like, we act like it's, I mean, honestly, we act like terrorism is a bigger problem in America when terrorism is essentially a non-problem in America. But this is the way our media works, right? Our media does not give you truth. Our media is not based on truth. It doesn't bring you truth. It brings you a false view of reality that in general doesn't get down to the actual core issues, but also gets us all hyped up about things that are not legitimate issues. So someone said, "Don't get in a car with Lee." I didn't say I didn't say they died in my car crashes. I never had fingers crossed, knock on wood, whatever you say. I haven't even had a car crash in my life. But yeah, knock on wood came from knock on the cross with Jesus. That's like the origins of knock on wood, which is weird because why would you want good luck to knock on the thing that executed another guy? Another guy who, although I'm both not religious and not Christian, if you read what he actually talked about, a lot of it was kind of like taking care of people and, not doing the debt thing and not having usury. And it was kind of like be good to people. And so, they ignore all of that, of course, nowadays. But why would you knock on the thing that we used to execute that guy? That's going to give you good luck. Knock on dynamite. I hope it doesn't happen to me. All right. Want to move on to another story in a moment. I'm going to go to onlyrumble.com/Lee Camp. That's where this will continue. But let's do one more story before I get there. This is a crazy video. It also shows how insane our mainstream media is, how much it is misleading you about the world. And it's referencing how we hear so much about homelessness in San Francisco, homelessness in Los Angeles, but also homelessness around the world and in various areas of the world. And yet there are large swaths of America where you don't hear about the poverty, the homelessness. There's basically no coverage of it, very little discussion of it at all. And this video is just, I mean, it's heartbreaking, but it's incredible. This is footage from a town in West Virginia. Hold on. I don't want to use the song in case it's like copyrighted or something, but this is just a completely bombed out area of West Virginia. There are parts of West Virginia that are desperately, desperately poor. They've also been heavily polluted. This is an area, and again, this is something you will not get from your mainstream media, even if they talk about West Virginia poverty. This is a state, a lot of the state, that has just been gutted by industrial action, industrial behavior, corporate behavior in America. This is an area of the world, of the nation, where companies have gone, they've extracted both the resources in terms of the coal in the area, the fracking, but they have also extracted the life force out of so many people. So many of those miners died at 40, 45 from black lung. I knew one who died in early to mid 40s from black lung. He died in the late 80s, early 90s. But it's just utter destruction in some of these places. Yet we don't talk about this. This is what a lot of America looks like. And yet it's not really discussed. It's not covered by your mainstream media. These are just wholly bombed out areas of the United States. I mean, this looks like a bomb hit it. This is the bomb of capitalism that landed in this town in West Virginia. And again, this is not just West Virginia. It's not just that town. There are other areas of the country that look and feel like this. This is the bomb of capitalism that just extracts everything it can and then gets the fuck out. The industry leaves. It ships the jobs overseas. There's no loyalty to the people, to the lives that have committed themselves throughout decades to these corporations to enrich a tiny number of just full-on cocksuckers. And if you don't like that term, then I can also say twat lickers. Whatever term you need to insert there that would be bleeped on television. That is what you need to insert right there. It just enriches a tiny, tiny number of people, and then they leave town. And we see it happen again and again with so much of America. And sure, some places some places in America are able to find new ways to have people be able to live there. You know, Pittsburgh is one that's doing relatively okay, despite the fact that the industries that built up Pittsburgh have now fled. But, you know, they generally have to do that by inventing new consumerist jobs like dog grooming or, I sell wine openers that have kitten faces on them. Basically, that's people are getting by. You got to invent some new job or product or something to even survive these days, or some ridiculous job that shouldn't even exist in our world, like, I don't know, YouTube personality. That should not be a job. We should, so there are some areas that have found a way to get by, but that doesn't justify the system. That's a survival mechanism. It's a Band-Aid. And once all of the wine openers with the cat faces on them have been sold, once we've mined all of the wine openers with the cat faces and, dog faces, and you can have a little cat versus dog people battle to see who's going to get the most or best wine openers. Once we've extracted all of that, then we got to move on to the next thing. And that again is how the gravity of capitalism works. You extract everything, the rich, the ruling elite in this ongoing class war. Basically, in this class war, they bombed that city in West Virginia, and yet they get to call it legal, right? They get to call it good and positive for the community, right? Those corporations built up the community. They did this wonderful thing. So we get to call it all of those great things. And in fact, It is just extraction and enriching of a tiny, tiny number of people. And like I said, most of this is never covered on your mainstream media, even when they cover poverty. And something actually, I'm going to show it on this episode. The episode of Most Censored News, I covered the largest landlords in the country, including Blackstone, and what they're doing to the nation, how they're destroying lives. But in that episode, I mentioned that we have, hundreds of thousands of homeless people, but even more than that are facing homelessness or near homeless. And yet we have millions upon millions of houses that sit empty across the country, because the truth is those are now collector's items for incredibly wealthy people. They just buy up 10, 12, see how the price goes. Maybe they'll sell them off. Maybe they'll hang on to them empty for a while. It's a collector's item for the egregiously rich in this country. And so that's another form of bombing an area. When you gut a whole city and it's all bought out by investors who aren't even using the housing units, then you end up with what? A largely empty city or 1/3 empty town. And that's how is that different than bombing it? How is that different than burning down those houses? Oh, so you bought it as an investor. It sits empty. No one can use it and no one can afford to live there. How, for the people that used to live there, how is that different than bombing it? They don't have houses. They can't be there. The ones that are there have lost their community. So how's that different than a bomb? It's a bomb of capitalism. And again, this is what you won't get from your mainstream media, from your corporate media. You also won't get it from a lot of YouTube personalities, which should not be a job. I can't stress that enough. If you're a YouTube personality, you fucking give it up, okay? I hope some of you understand what irony is. All right, I'm going to rumble.com/Lee Camp. That is the only place you can see the rest of this. Oh, except for my locals page. You guys who are watching there, if you're members at leecamp.net, you can keep watching there as well. So join me over at rumble.com/Lee Camp. It is free to watch at rumble.com/Lee Camp. It will not cost you a thing. I, of course, hope you will become a member at leecamp.net and get my free book, my free ebook, once you join up there, called Dangerous Ideas. But all right, let's